I was going through some of my older videos in my channel and I came across some regarding face masks, gas masks, respirators, that sort of thing. And these are not videos from a couple weeks ago, a couple days ago. These are years old. My mask, that mask, is several years old. I bought it several years ago, same as the GSR that I currently use for when going out and about. And it brought the attention to some things regarding properly done preparedness. When you do preparedness the right way, you cover a number of aspects that are important. Yes, of course, based on the rule of three, which says, and I have it here written in my book, this one's 3 survival skills. The rule of three says you cannot survive. For those of you that are not aware of it, it's a rule by which you kind of organize your priorities for survival and preparedness. Basically says you cannot survive 3 minutes without air, 3 hours exposed to extreme weather conditions, shelter. It's important. You cannot survive 3 days without water. Water, methods of filtering water, that's very important. You cannot survive 3 weeks without food. Yes, of course, food storage is important, as we all know, especially now these days. And my personal interpretation, you cannot survive 3 seconds with a bullet through a vital organ. So that kind of lays a set of priorities as of what, at least the way I see it, properly done survival and preparedness is all about. So face masks, absolutely. First aid kits, yes, of course. Food, absolutely. Money, communications, EDC, flashlights. All of these things are fairly popular when talking about these topics. In terms of knives, that sort of thing, yeah. In terms of firearms, though, that's when things start getting a little bit more. Is that really necessary? Isn't that too extreme? Are you a gun nut? Well, the way I see it, no, you're not. The way I see it, it is yet again one of those bases that has to be covered. Folks, this is Fernando doing yet another video for Modern Survivalists, and the title of this video is Guns for Pacifists, for Women, and for people that don't like guns. And I mean that title because these last few days I've been asked on Instagram. My Instagram, by the way, is Furfal308. I've been asked by one self-proclaimed pacifist, by several women, and by guys that just were not interested in guns. Hey Fernando, what about getting a gun? What should I get? I'm not a gun person. Hey Fernando, I'm a lady, I'm a woman. Hey Fernando, I'm a pacifist and I want a gun. Not kidding, that's exactly what's been happening in these last few days. That's the kind of questions from that sort of people that I've been getting, and I'd like to address that. Now, we have to understand that people come in all sorts of ways, shapes, colors, forms, walks of lives, preferences, and that sort of thing. And there may be folks out there that just don't like guns. If you don't like guns, then that's perfectly fine. You know, it's not something that's mandatory for everyone, and yet, especially because of the situation going on right now in many parts of the world, people are starting to understand certain things as of, okay, maybe you don't like guns, but maybe you still like to be alive and you wouldn't like to be dead, right? That makes perfect sense for me, even for someone that doesn't like guns. For someone that doesn't like guns, then that person probably thinks about a firearm as a last resort thing. Something that even if I don't like using it, I may want to have one in case I just don't have any choice but to defend myself. For that type of people, I think that a revolver is the best way to go. And that's usually when people start freaking out about how bad a revolver is, how a terrible choice. No, it's not. It is the gun I've recommended in this book. It's the gun I've recommended in my first book, The Modern Survival Manual, Surviving the Economic Collapse. I was recommending revolvers for those kind of people 10 years ago, and I still believe that. We are not all the same. We don't like the same things. Our commitment to some of these things will not always be the same. And I still think you have a right to defend yourself, even if you're a pacifist and you don't like guns, even if you are a woman that is not particularly interested in guns. I think that it's especially true for women that they should have a firearm so as to defend themselves, so as to somewhat compensate for the physical difference when confronted by a male attacker. Women should, above everyone else, be particularly interested in guns. Ironically, it's not always the case. You go to a firing range, usually you see more guys than women. Women are also particularly good at shooting because they don't have that stigma of, yeah, you're a guy, you kind of should know something about firearms. Women are particularly good at listening, following the instructions you give them, and not committing many of these bad habits that many guys have. So if you're a woman, you're absolutely should be in this group of, okay, maybe if I don't like guns, get yourself a gun. Why a revolver? Well, it is the most simple gun for you to use. It's simply about opening the gun. You have a control on the left side for you right-handed folks. It's going to be for most revolvers something similar. So you open the gun, you load it, you close it, and that's basically it. You pull the trigger, the thing shoots, and yes, you're limited to 6 rounds. Yes, it's not as tough or as reliable as a semi-automatic pistol, but the simplicity makes it ideal for people that are going to be much more limited in the kind of training they're going to be receiving. Maybe it's going to be a class, basic safety class on how to handle a firearm, and that's all the interest you have. Perfect. A revolver will allow you to arm yourself. It will allow you to defend yourself as a last resort tool. Now, if you're telling me that, okay, no, I'm not a pacifist. I kind of like the idea of a gun. Maybe I want to start shooting more frequently. Okay, then a pistol could be an option for you. Guys, women, men, doesn't matter. A pistol like a Glock, it is very simple to use once you have that training. Now, what are some of the differences? Why is it that I'm so convinced about the advantages of a revolver? Because this, as good as it is, as tough, and it's tougher than that revolver for sure, you have more capacity. This is what's used around the world for military and police. You need a certain amount of training and practice with certain frequency. A pistol will have a chamber that if it left empty will not work, the gun will not fire. Many pistols have a manual safety, not the case of the Glock, but many guns do. That is something often forgotten, and in some cases it ends up costing people their lives. A pistol has to be held correctly for it to function, especially polymer flame pistols, because of how lightweight they are. If you're not holding them properly, it may fail to fire and cycle correctly. Your hands, if they're not in the right position, you may interrupt the cycling of the slide when ejecting and feeding it around into the chamber. All of those things could go wrong. Even things like, and I do discuss this in Street Survival Skills to a good degree. Let's suppose you're someone in your house, someone breaks in, he's on top of you, maybe a guy trying to rape you. You push the guns against that person, you press the trigger, it's not going to be firing because it's out of battery. You need to know what to do. You need to put that gun into a retention position closer to your body, fire from that. All of these things require training and practice. With a revolver, you press the gun against the side of a person, you pull the trigger, the gun is going to be firing. What about the limited capacity? It's usually not that big a deal. Yes, of course, I'd rather have 17 rounds over 6. But keep in mind, that's .357 Magnum, and we'll get to that in a second. Is a lot more powerful, but in general, for home defense, as soon as someone starts shooting, as the home defender starts shooting 1-2 rounds, criminals take off 95% of the chances. The chances of you messing up are greater than the chances of the limited amount of ammunition capacity being a real problem. What gun do I recommend for someone that's not particularly interested? A revolver, 4-inch barrel like this one, .357 Magnum mid-frame. A Colt, a Smith & Wesson, Ruger, those are all good revolvers. This is a Manurun MR73, maybe the best revolver ever made, way beyond what most people would be interested in spending. But if you can get something like this, of course. But remember those names: Smith & Wesson, Colt, Ruger. I'm not particularly fond of Taurus. I don't think it's a great gun. You have some great cheap Spanish revolvers, Llama, Astra. Those are good Spanish revolvers, usually very cheap in the market, but much better than the Brazilian ones. .357 Magnum, why? Because you can load it with .38 Special. .38 Special is a very decent round and has much more of a mild recoil. .357 Magnum usually means it's also a larger gun, and contrary to common belief, a larger gun has more weight, more mass, and makes recoil more manageable, right? Keep those things in mind. Now, you're going to be training a lot, it's going to be a passion of yours, or you think you're going to be practicing with more frequency, get yourself a Glock pistol. Glock 17 is a very decent choice, both for men and women. Now, there are, of course, legal restrictions in many countries, and maybe you cannot get a handgun, but you can get a semi-automatic carbine like that 22. 22 is not ideal for self-defense, but it can be used for self-defense, and it has been used many times. Every day someone is using a 22 to defend his home or himself. Even though it's a small caliber and semi-automatic, you have the ability of firing a quick follow-up shots, minimal recoil. For someone that is small framed and not particularly fond of guns, a 22 is a great choice. You can get a Ruger 1022 with a 25 or 20 round magazine, and that gives you a good amount of firepower even in an underpowered cartridge. In terms of lever action guns, yes, lever action carbines are great. I love my Winchester, you see it right there. But it is a lot more complex in terms of operating for each round you're going to be firing. It looks very cool in movies, not nearly as easy to do under stress when someone is attacking you. Somewhat of a similar situation goes on with shotguns. Now, shotguns are a favorite for home defense, often recommended by people in gun stores, and you have that famous mechanism that supposedly scares people off. Sometimes it actually does scare people. It is a very intimidating sound. I don't trust on sound alone to defend myself, and you need a gun with certain capacities beyond the sound it makes. But yes, for sure, it's a classic for law enforcement, a pump action shotgun, and the cartridge it fires is extremely powerful. There's a lot of power packed in a 12 gauge shot shell, but there's a lot of recoil, and you operating for each round fired may be a disadvantage as well. I like the idea instead of a semi-automatic shotgun that gives you the advantage of semi-automatic firing for each trigger pull. That's my recommendation. If you are a smaller frame person, maybe the 12 gauge has quite a bit of recoil. I wouldn't recommend a pump shotgun for a person that's not going to be training a whole lot. I'd rather go with a 12 gauge. Now, the recoil is something you have to keep in mind. If legally a choice for you, an AR-15 is much more manageable. It's a lightweight gun, and of course it's quite powerful as well. Yeah, maybe if you're not much of a gun person, an AR-15 or M4 may be kind of not your thing, but remember, at least get yourself a decent revolver. This is the kind of gun you can keep in your house. With minimal maintenance, with minimal training, you will have a weapon so as to defend yourself if it ever comes down to that, and defend your family too. Folks, it's going to be all for now. See you on our next video. Have an awesome day.